Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, it's your friendly neighbourhood Madness here, back once again to bring you another mad map. Now, I apologise it's been so long since I presented you with my last map, but it's been a bit hectic in my life right at the moment, so I thought I'd leave it until I had a little bit more time, and I've actually got a new microphone, so hopefully there's a little less background noise in this video. In any case, today I'll be presenting you with a style that I haven't actually shown before. Now, this is a style which is different from my original full colour maps. This style, in fact, is reminiscent of the black and white maps you may have seen in the Lord of the Rings series, written by J.R.R. Tolkien. And actually, it's reproduced in quite a few maps these days, within novels or fantasy maps. So, without further ado, I'll get started and show you the drawing I made, and also how I went about the process of drawing this map, because it's slightly different than the other maps I've shown you. So, let's get started, shall we? Now, I started with the landmass. Obviously, it's a little bit more important in a black and white map to have a clear and defined shoreline, because in the other maps you can sort of cover up any blemishes with textures, whereas in this map you have just the line defining the sea and the land. So you want to be sure that you've got a good, solid line which is not too mismatched. This is true for either just computer drawings or, in fact, line drawings that you do in real life. Now we move on, of course, to the mountains. This is the first process of trying to define an area, especially if you want to add in more features later. Now, the mountains here, I'm a little bit new to this texture pack, because obviously it's a different texture pack than the one I usually use. So you might see me experimenting. There's a few deletions, obviously, as I think, no, that didn't work. And because also you can't be as promiscuous with the details as you can in the other maps, because obviously they're a lot less clear. They're just two colours, so it's harder for the eye to distinguish between individual sprites as you place them. So my advice to anyone who's drawing a black and white map is to try and be a little bit more spacious, use less images or less indicators to show where a landmass is, and hopefully that will present you with a bit of an easier viewing, because in the end a lot of people will have trouble. They'll get a little bit of eye strain if they try and focus on something which is too detailed. Now, I will admit that my map is a little bit clustered towards the end, but I'll say that I am, of course, experimenting, and we will see in the future, hopefully, a little bit of a clearing up of my style, but we'll see. Now, this is me just testing the rivers, because obviously rivers are going to be different as well, different colours, different schemes, trying to fit them in with the mountains as well. Now, for anyone specifically using Campaign Cartographer 3, I would advise that you try and link up the black rivers with the shaded side of a mountain, because obviously it hides the square end, and you don't want that showing on your map, because it looks a little bit weird, I have to admit. Oh, that's my computer having a little bit of an issue. And now we move on to seeing me. I'm just trying to make sure that they all line up as well, because despite the advantages of using this software, you do have the problem of a square-ended river, and that is never going to look good. So also I'm adding in the estuaries. Now, if you have a chance, do look at the maps drawn for the Lord of the Rings series, because you'll see how heavily rivered they are. It was quite an interesting thing when I was doing my research that I saw that Tolkien, or the people drawing Tolkien's maps, I'm not sure if it was Tolkien himself, but that's just shoddy research on my part, but they used a lot of rivers when defining the world, and I think it was mainly because any other details are quite sparse. Now, in my maps I try and put in a lot of detail, try and give a lot of context, but obviously because the Lord of the Rings maps were being used to design a world and just purely host a story, it was decided that they'd rather name areas and add lettering and things to the map rather than put in the detail and sort of show what an area was. They'd actually just say what an area was, say it was a desert or Mordor or things like that. Now, obviously, these days we've got a lot of maps of Middle-earth and other places, and they're a lot more detailed, but I think that this style is actually quite pure. It's easier to see where areas are, it's easier to distinguish what's a town and what's a forest and things like that, because it's so very simple. And of course, it's a little bit more for a storytelling perspective than it is for a person who wants to just draw a map. But yeah, I like the style, and I probably will use it again. Now, obviously, going back to the software, this was a little bit of an issue I had where the trees, when you draw in these sort of random shapes of trees, they do tend to fill in blocks, so you might want to space them out, and then to give the areas a little less squareness, use individual trees to define the edges, which I think gives it a nice sort of scrubby feel and gives it more personality than just a blocky, solid mass of trees. Now, moving on, you can see I'm also using the city and town icons, but I'm not using them just as individual shapes. I'm trying to mix them all together and sort of blend them using the bring forward, bring back tools to actually create individual cities from these similar looking icons. It's currently I'm just sort of experimenting, but hopefully in the future I can present to you a few more interesting ideas when it comes to these new textures. Now, also, you can see I'm adding in the land textures, which is something that you won't find in a Tolkien map. They're very, very sparse on the details there. They prefer to use a word, whereas I prefer to use a texture. But obviously, it's from a certain height, they do look all the same. So I will provide a link to my DeviantArt page, which is where I do host most of my maps, including the maps I don't show in video. And there you'll probably be able to see the detail far closer than you will be able to in this video, and I apologise for that. But anyway, moving on from that, I'm also trying to think up a storyline here when I was writing it out, because obviously you don't want something which lots of fields and everything like that. So here I'm using the destroyed building icon to sort of create a Egyptian post-apocalyptic situation where it's like an Egyptian civilization that has actually been ravaged by Lord knows what. If you've got an idea, do leave it in the comment section. I'm sure a lot of people out there will be a bit more creative than myself, especially seeing as it's quite late at night when I'm recording this. I apologise. Anyway, moving on. This bit there's a bit of desert I've added in just for some texture, giving the Egyptian feel, but I've also used what are essentially treetops there to try and indicate desert bush, sort of little cacti. Now, this is the advantage of the less detailed software, less detailed textures, I mean, is that you can actually present other images, regardless of what they are, as something different. Say, if you've got a spiky treetop, you can use it as a section for a cactus or something like that. It's the versatility of using black and white compared to the rather more stringent use of colour-based maps, textures. I like it. I enjoy it, and I also included here a little bit where I went a bit wrong. This is the problem where if you're not watching. This was something I did wrong. I wasn't looking where I was selecting and ended up selecting a different tree type, which is a bad idea, because then it meant I couldn't see my original tree textures. And the way that the textures work in this program is that they sort of present lots of small icons as opposed to one solid mass. So I had to go around and delete all the original texture and bring in new ones. So a little word of warning to anyone who's using this: do make sure you pick the right texture before you start placing it, because you will end up having to go back and either erase it or spend a lot of time deleting every single icon. Right, now moving on. I'm not sticking to placing one type of texture this time. I'm sort of flitting between placing the icons for cities and towns, and also placing down the areas of sort of land and textures for the landmass, because I feel it might give a bit more evolution to the area as opposed to just putting down one type of texture, then moving on, then coming back. That tends to make you tend to lose your train of thought when you move further into the landmass and sort of not know what you're going to do next. So I decided to try and do the different areas, defined by my rivers in fact. I sort of think of the locations as different sections, which helps give a little bit more presentable. Which helps keep it presentable, in other words. Right, now you can see there I also used a different type of tree. It's not very noticeable actually, I'm not sure why that is, but it's in the actual picture, it's a little bit easy to see. And from a distance, that is my map. It's, yeah, you can tell that in a lower resolution it's hard to see what the actual texture is. So it's up to you really. If you're drawing a black and white map, you can either go for the textures, which are I do like the textures, they're nice and individual, but they will mean that if you're doing a big map, it's going to be hard to see the textures. So I advise you try and keep it as basic as possible, and maybe go for the Tolkien style, which is to just label an area. And now, obviously, in my DeviantArt image, I'll show you what I've called everything, or just using random names. But you can see that by labeling something, it also gives it a little bit more description and helps people. Sort of, it's more subconscious than anything. People go, "Oh, that's a tree," and then for the rest of the image. They're not as searching about what the little icons are, especially seeing as they do blend a little bit too much, I think, the trees. Maybe in the future I might try placing trees individually, although God knows how successful that will be. Right, now moving on, you can see I've done the rivers. Not the rivers, the sea. You can tell it's late, I apologise. And I'm using the Tolkien style, which is to actually introduce lines indicating depth as opposed to using the textures that I have preferred in the other maps. Now, you start with a thick line and then move to thinner lines, indicating the essentially it's like a ripple, whereas the island is giving off a ripple which is radiating out into the sea. Depending on the depth, you then change how much distance there is between the little lines. Now, also, this is another problem with the black and white system, which you won't find with the color-based system, especially in this program, is that there will be a lot of angles which come from the fractal nature of the lines that I've created, and they might look a little bit linear. So I advise in future people try and keep your lines as fluid as possible, and maybe use more fractal lines if possible. So that's my map. I'm sorry that was a little bit rushed, but I hope that you enjoyed the creation, if nothing else. And as you can see there, a little red icon, the traditional Tolkien style of colouring. So that was my map. I hope you enjoyed it. The commentary was as rambling as ever. I know, I apologise. And hopefully I'll come to you again soon with some more black and white maps and some varying styles on that theme, trying to show how versatile it can be, especially if there's any people who are either authors or people who are quite creative. They can use this system to actually map out their own worlds that they're creating, and it does help. Trust me, I do a lot of writing as well as a lot of drawing, and I find that if I've drawn an area, it will certainly help me visualize where people are going, what they're doing next. In any case, I hope you're all having a good time, and I'll see you next time. Good morning, good evening, good night, and goodbye.